Okay. Heather, you want to get started, and then McKenna, and then I can do my part.
Okay. Just let me look at that. So it talks about briefly describe your physical or cognitive domain intervention assignment from lesson 11 to 12. So for the physical one, some of the main risks or problems for children, like I didn't have my table set up the best for the physical part, but I did age group 2 to 6. And I talked about some of the finer or gross motor difficulties, like especially for kids, some might have genetic um, disabilities that reduce their fine or gross motor skills. And so that could affect their stamina and energy and flexibility. Um, and then I talked about some of their strength is the biggest strength that I talked about that kind of fits into all the different risks is the plasticity. So the ability to change and to grow. I actually worked with a child last year who had a gross, he was born with a genetic low body strength. And so his stamina was really, really low. And so he worked with me, and we did through a physical therapist, we increased his core strength and his like physical strength, and how he was able to progress, where he was able to sit at a circle time without kind of crumbling, and how he was able to, his muscles were able to get stronger and improve from that. And I thought that was really neat. Some of the interventions that I came up with to help alleviate risks or problems is to be aware of limitations, and lots of movement. So doing lots of physical activities, especially with this little boy, we walked up and down stairs all the time so that he could constantly get that practice, and lots of play, and safe areas of play. For him, climbing was a major risk because of his low strength. And so whenever he would climb, just to climb upstairs to get to a slide, I had to be right behind him in case he would lose strength and would crumble. And so some of those things would be like, attentive adults, monitoring aggressive children in groups, proper nutrition, and proper sleep. And the question says, how can awareness of children's or parent strengths be used in informing effective interventions targeting risk or problems? And me and the ladies that I interviewed, we discussed how it helps to know the limitation, to also be aware and to look for problem areas. It also helps to know when interventions are necessary, and correct pairing with a child and adult in an educational setting, like especially if a child might need an aid, having the right chemistry between the adult and the child will help. Some adult child pairings might not always work for the child or be best for the child because of how that adult reacts. And when you know what the limitations are, you also have the skill. You get people who have the skills to help the child. And in the cognitive, there were the 5 risk areas that I came up with was FAS, which is fetal alcohol syndrome, speech delay, autism, low or high functioning, and dyslexia and ADD or ADHD. And for the FAS, the strength that I find is there's a higher level of creative thinking. And for an intervention, occupational therapy, I think, is the most effective, especially with a modified classroom setting. Educational support and physical programs such as gymnastics, and they'll help them reach new levels. And for speech delay, I find that they are highly intelligent. It's just sometimes it depends on if their speech is expressive or receptive. but they tend to, you know, kind of hold things in. And so speech therapy to help them get their full sounds so that they can express or receive speech more effectively. Talked about autism, high or low functioning, and I found that the strength was a focused talents. Like most commonly, you notice like, you know, high musical talent, but it's not just musically. Like sometimes like they're artistically or business like. There's this famous autistic girl. I can't remember her name. She has a movie that was made about her that she was able to, she can relate to animals. And so she was able to optimize better farming layouts for cattle before they are slaughtered. It kind of helped them be happier, which improved the quality of the meat.
That's so random.
I know, it was just such a focused town that she was in. She does like seminars and everything, and then she talks about how her autism is one of her greatest strengths. And
Wow, that's
yeah,
crazy.
I know. And she talks about like how she was able to reach that level. She had a teacher who was able to reach her and get her excited about learning. And so for that, I find that the best intervention is, you know, occupational therapy, sometimes modified classrooms, educational support, mentoring, and physical programs as well. I feel like I could talk forever about that, especially in my field of work. Um, there's also dyslexia, which I find is also associated with high intelligence, but their reading is challenged because their brain sees words or understands words differently than, you know, a standard normal brain. And so reading, for intervention, it'd be reading and visual learning therapy, specialized training to reach the brain that sees words differently, and sometimes educational support depends on how moderate to severe the dyslexia is. I have a friend who all of her children are dyslexic, and she homeschools, and she actually went through various training to qualify to be able to reach her children, to be able to teach them to read effectively. And I thought that was neat. Then in ADD and ADHD, I find the biggest strength is the hyperfocus ability. I think of Michael Phelps as that example. He's able to swim so well and train so hard because of his ADHD. He hyper focuses on the task, and he's able to just focus on that to the ignoring anything else around him. But it can be a challenge when you're hyper focusing because you miss out of things around you sometimes when you're hyper focusing. So once again, it goes down to occupational therapy, sometimes modified classroom settings. It depends on how severe, extra programming and physical activities that can help activate the communication between both sides of the brain, which is the challenge for ADD and ADHD. So, for the, okay, then we need to talk about the social emotional domain. What I picked this for the social emotional, it is trauma that can actually affect development in a child, especially social emotionally. Like it actually affect their physical or even cognitive development, depends on how severe the trauma is. The child that I work with now in school, he was 3 years old when he witnessed his uncle die. And from that, he became completely nonverbal until he was 5. And
Wow.
yeah, and so I work with him now, and as a result of him withdrawing within himself and losing speech, he's also has multiple behavioral and other challenges in the classroom because of that is linked to this trauma. And so I was researching about school-based strategies to help children who have experienced like abuse or some sort of trauma. And one of the things it talks about, the article is called School-Based Strategies to Prevent Violence, Trauma, and Psychopathology, the Challenges of Going to Scale. Oh, I had to scroll up to, and then I had to go to this paragraph that talks about the 4Rs program, which is reading, writing, respect, and resolution. It said the 4Rs program is a universal school-based intervention that integrates language arts curriculum for kindergarten through grade 5, which goes into, uses the 4Rs, reading, writing, respect, and resolution, and uses high-quality children's literature as a springboard for helping students gain skills and understanding in several areas, including handling anger, listening, cooperation, assertiveness, and negotiation. And that is especially difficult for children who have experienced trauma, because they react differently because of the things that they experience. They have a hard time handling anger or listening or cooperation because they get into survival mode. And so certain areas where they don't feel safe, they get into the fight or flight, and their thinking brain shuts down. And instead they get into the emotional side of the brain and the emotional thinking. And so using coping strategies to help them handle anger and listening and cooperation, it helps them leave the emotional brain more and return to the thinking brain, which will help. And that's actually what I do with this boy that I work with. When he gets into the elevated fight or flight situation, I remove him from a situation. I take him to a sensory room where he's able to recenter, feel safe again, and then we use social stories to help him cope in a social setting. So like recently he's been having issues with aggression, and so we'd be walking by other kids in the hallway at school, and he would just reach out and punch them or kick them, just seemingly no reason. And so we've been using social stories to help him, like when you feel angry, when you feel, you know, unsafe, whatever, you don't hit, instead you take a deep breath and you calm down. And since we've been starting those social stories, when he's been feeling angry, he's been stopping and moving to another part of the room and sitting in a chair and just breathing in and out and not wanting to talk to anyone or not talking to me. And when I recognize those signs and I give him that space, he's able to self-regulate himself again and come back to thinking brain and then back into normal, well, as much normal learning as I can with him. So I found that to be interesting. I feel like I've talked forever. Should move on. So yeah, that's what I came up with. So
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
For, let's see, I'll start with the physical risks. I took it like super literally, like what are physical risks of children, and one that I think is an issue is for sure like nutrition and sleep. And not for this class, but I've been taking a couple child development classes, and in one of the classes I read an article about how when like a woman's pregnant, she is very concerned about what she puts in her body because her child's growing and developing. But then like parents don't treat feeding their kids like that in a way, which I never really thought about, but it's kind of true. They just kind of give them like whatever, like if they want candy, they'll just give them candy to like make them stop complaining. And it was like, oh my gosh, it's like the same thing, even though, you know, they're out of the womb, they're still developing and they still need like that serious care. And I don't know, I liked how it compared and how people that take feeding children seriously, because it is a serious issue if they don't get the right food, that they might not develop properly or sleep. I was talking to my mom, and I have a little brother and he's 12, and he doesn't have like, he's not disabled, but he just doesn't like school. And so she's like, we put him to bed earlier and he focuses better in school, and he's doing way better. And I thought that was surprising. Just putting him to bed like an hour earlier is making such a big difference in his schooling. And so I don't think people realize how big of a deal it is to put your kids to bed early and give them good food, and they'll be fine. But if you give them candy and, anyway. So I thought that was interesting, that article, and then just the difference in my brother of an extra hour of sleep is like changing the world for him. And then for cognitive, I like what you said, Heather, about autism and their focus on, sometimes they have like a focus and they're able to excel in one area. And I actually thought of my cousin when coming up with like cognitive ideas. He has a talent he remembers anything and everything about pop culture, and anytime he sees a movie, he knows the composer, he knows the director, he knows all the actors, and like random facts about it. And he just has a talent, and he's autistic, and I don't know how we can use that for a career, but I mean, he has a crazy great memory, and that is something that is a total strength for him, that a normal brain can't do, but he has the ability to remember everything, and I think that is crazy cool. And he was able to excel in school because of it, and so he used that as a strength to get through school. He has a master's degree, and I mean, he's very well educated because he is using that. People would see it as a disability, obviously, or a weakness, but he is totally used it as a strength, and he is one of the smartest people I know. And then for social and emotional domain, I was talking to my mom. I interviewed her, and she brought up a great point that I didn't really think about how parents just put too much pressure on their kids, and not because they want to in a mean way, but I mean, everyone wants their kids to excel and be good at what they're doing, be good at school, extracurricular. And I don't think parents realize that sometimes they need to accept maybe their children aren't good at something, or they're going to fail a test once in a while, and they shouldn't freak out, because maybe that's something you can work on together and improve. And I just liked how she brought that up, because I have a friend and her parents do that, and they expect 100% perfection, and it has made her into this crazy person who is like so anal about making sure everything's right, and it is so annoying to me. I'm like, you don't have to be perfect all the time. And it just, seeing her, not that she's a bad person, but it's just crazy to see the effects of what pressure like that on a kid can do. And I don't think parents are realizing that either, that it's okay for kids to mess up, and they shouldn't expect perfection from kids because they're still learning. And I just think it's crazy that you would expect someone who's learning how to speak and talk and use their body. I think we should be expecting perfections of adults. That's more realistic. But for children, I think it's a little crazy when they're just, trying to figure out their place in the world, what they want to do, kind of a thing. So
we're not perfect. Why should we expect our kids to be? Yeah. So it's awesome.
My turn?
Yep.
Okay. So for the I did all the interviews with my mom. Just because I wanted to hear kind of what she has to say, and then do my own research. Because there are a lot of things, like the way I grew up, it's totally different of what she would say now, because she learned the hard way, let's say that. Want to be educated or anything. She just decided that she will do it her way, and if it damages the children, oh well, kind of thing. But now she's like, has a totally different view on it because she sees the consequences of her actions. So for me, I chose the cognitive domain intervention, and when I interviewed my mom, she talked about having routine and having family dinners and stuff like that, and I just thought that was really interesting because we never had family dinners or anything, and I always ate by myself because my dad worked for the church and he was gone 3 weeks out of the entire month, because he wanted to go above and beyond for the church and put the church first. And so, and we never had a routine or anything. And so that did more damage than good. But I liked how Heather mentioned the alcohol syndrome, because I'm adopted and my mother was 90% of the time she was a drunk while pregnant with me. Come to find out, just a few years ago. And so when I got tested and everything, that's why I had the ADHD, and that's why I was able to grow out of it, because it my brain developed enough in a way that it could heal itself, if that makes sense.
The
And
plasticity.
Yes, and so but I had to take like a lot of medicine because it was like really bad and really strong. But definitely one thing that the strengths that came from the ADHD was being really good in school. I was able to focus on my homework with the medicine, and I was able to I don't know, see things differently, honestly. Like it was I saw homework and life and friendships and stuff like that from like different angles, just because of how my brain was wired. And so that was a big strength, because it helped me through a lot of trials and hardships, to get through them easier than some other people would. Some of the negative things, though, were the overstimulation that came with that as well, that I had to have take one thing at a time. I could not do multiple things or multitask or anything. I had to finish one thing and then move on to the next.
It'd be overwhelming.
Yes. But I think it's just fascinating how, especially little children, that as they grow into school age, how if the brain is wired in one way, that parents and professionals, such as the teachers, have to really find a proper intervention for those kids. That they really have to understand how their brain is set up and what kind of learning style they need in order for the plasticity.
It's not an easy word.
For that really to work and for that really to kick in, because I've seen a lot of other kids where they didn't have the proper intervention and they're just messed up. they could not grow out of it, or they could not learn to deal with it, with their disabilities or with their learning disorders. It's just really interesting. Then for the social and emotional domain, I did the peer pressure one. One thing that over the years I've seen is that it might be, I don't know if it's for most kids or it's just some kids, but what I've seen is those kids who do have the peer pressure problem, they usually do it for the reason of that they don't get the attention either at home, or the parents are the way that the parents show attention to the child is not what the child needs. And so when I researched the intervention for that, it really comes down to the parents, that they recognize that something needs to change, and that they as a family come together and seek help from a professional such as a counselor or a therapist, or from, some school districts have like certain counselors that they work with. And so it's just really interesting how that all comes together. When I interviewed my mom, she said that let's see here. She said sometimes it needs to be withstand the pressure of friends to try out new things, and it's crucial for the child to have a good relationship with the parent, and that the parents should try to work together with teachers and do wholesome family activities at home, and that a home should be a place where the child feels welcome, loved, and safe, which I think is one of the best interventions for dealing with peer pressure. That way the child doesn't even feel the need to please somebody at school, because they know that their parents and siblings value them however they are, and that they can always go to them if there's if they feel like they need to talk to somebody, and that they don't feel like they need to prove themselves.
It builds confidence too.
And I think that's it, because the last one is talking about the interviews, which I talked about here and there. But yeah, I think that's it on my end.
Forgot to mention that the two people I interviewed is one was the preschool teacher that I work with at work, and a fellow educational aide. And so we were both kind of we're in the preschool and the kindergarten together. And so I've got to work with her since last spring, and it was just kind of neat talking about, like, I already kind of knew what her answers would be to the questions because of working with her. And I'm like, yeah, so what do you think of these? And she's like, yeah, that's what I thought you would say. And so I thought that was kind of neat. Let's see, to kind of guess her answers.
Okay, so now it says attempt to identify common elements of effective interventions. So from you both and me, what do you see like common interventions?
Well, interventions that work with both the primary caregiver and the primary educator, when they're in sync, they're more effective, because the interventions are kind of being reinforced in both areas. So what's being done at school is also being done at home, and they're the same things, and so it kind of reaches the child more, especially when it comes to like speech therapy or behavioral therapy. Like if there's a child who really struggles in certain areas, when the same techniques are being used in school and at home, it's like, oh, the child knows what to expect and knows how to handle the help.
Yeah, I was gonna say we all mentioned at least parents once, and I think that, I mean, parents are obviously the main. I mean, if they're raising their kids, it's different situations, but I mean, they are the main people that need to be aware if their child needs help, or need to back up the aid, and reinforce those rules in the home. Or parents are just key in that role of deciding to help their kids.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
And for
think it's important that the parents really get together with the teachers. I know it's especially hard here with all the large classrooms. One thing I think would be good would be if the like when we in Germany we have when the report cards come out, the teacher takes time to write at least a page, unless the child really has well behaved, then it's usually half a page of a summary of the child's behavior. And the report cards come out every 3 months. And then for elementary and part of middle school, they have a little notebook where when the child misbehaves, then the teacher will write about the behavior and what needs to change. And that gets sent home to the parents, and the parents have to sign it in and bring it back to the teacher, indicating that she's read it. And that's how we eliminate a lot of behavior issues at school. And that's how the teachers also help out the parents to understand how the child behaves outside of the home. And I think that's something that would help a lot here, because the parents just are not there during the school hours. And then when the kids come home and tell the parent one thing, but the teacher tells another, it's really difficult to know who's speaking the truth and who's trying to, kind of lie about the situation.
I find in my field of work, sometimes you face parents who don't recognize that there is a problem area. And so it's kind of tricky because it's like, it's not a dig, it's not an insult to the parents. It's like, okay, the intervention is required for this area because it is causing a problem, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your child or anything. It just means that there's help that's needed. And I find that sometimes you gotta be sensitive and compassionate in how interventions are approached from an educational point of view.
Yeah.
Because you face that, especially in the education field. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's just one thing that popped in my head. When I was working for the school district here, I saw the same thing, especially for the severely disabled children. When I was working with them on and off, at least here, most parents just really sent their disabled kids to the school to get rid of them because they don't want to face. Don't want to learn all the things all the interventions that need to happen in order for their child to deal with their disability and to deal with everyday life. And it's just certain interventions just have to happen in order to making the child happy is the wrong term, but that's the only way I can put it, so that they can have a somewhat normal life and not be frustrated about themselves all the time and be frustrated about the world.
A semblance of fulfillment.
Yeah,
Accomplishment.
exactly.
Something.
Okay. So I guess we covered everything. Let me